Quiet on the set, please.
Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
And action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
Welcome, everyone, to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign podcast. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Nan.
So, Steve, every woman and every actress I know has a drawer that a friend of mine calls the makeup graveyard. Have you ever heard about that?
I haven't heard it called that, but I've certainly witnessed it with some of my lady friends.
Yes. It's, that place where you've got lipsticks that are almost finished and eyeshadow that you hardly ever use, or that foundation you bought and it just doesn't quite match, but you don't throw it away or give it away. You just have it in the drawer. Well, that drawer has been on my mind this week after doing a deep dive on a powerful family dynasty that began all the way back in the beginning in silent films and continues working in film and television to this very day. And of course, we're talking about the Westmore family, who defined the art of movie makeup.
Well, from the curls of Mary Pickford to the invention of false eyelashes, the Westmore family pioneering vision laid the foundation of not only cinematic makeup, but makeup worn by civilians. Now today, we're diving into the rich legacy and sometimes turbulent lives of the Westmores, Hollywood's first family of makeup.
And let's start with the patriarch. George Westmore was born on June 27th, 1879 on the Isle of Wight in England. That's W-I-G-H-T. George enlisted in the British Army when he was 20 years old. He became a private in the 21st Lancers. He doubled as a baker and a barber for his company, which is such an interesting combo.
Yeah.
As George would often tell the story, one day a young war correspondent for the London Morning Post came into his tent and said, "Your renown as a barber has reached my ears. My name is Winston Churchill. I have come here not to get an article for my paper, but to have you cut my hair."
Nice impression, too.
Oh, well, thanks.
After being discharged from the Army for being medically unfit, he married Ada Savage, who was a barmaid he'd fallen in love with in his hometown. And he ended up opening up his own hairdressing saloon.
Yes.
And that's right. I said saloon, folks, not salon, which is interesting. And this saloon was opened in Newport on the Isle of Wight, and the saloon did very well. And soon, Ada gave birth to their first son, Montague, or Mont, or Monty as he was called, on July the 22nd, 1902. With the continued success of the hair saloon, I just like saying it, George decided to relocate to Canterbury on the British mainland.
Twins, Percival, Perce, and Ernest, Ern, were born there in 1904, and Walter, Wally, was born in 1906.
I love they all have nicknames.
I know they do. The family then moved to Canada, where George worked as a hairdresser in Montreal, Toronto, where daughter Dorothy was born in 1907, and they also moved to Quebec. They eventually ended up in the United States, living in Pittsburgh, San Antonio, New Orleans, Buffalo, St. Louis, Washington, D.C., and finally Cleveland.
They got around.
They did.
Their time in Cleveland proved to be a turning point for the family when, in 1913, George moved beyond the hairstyling and wig making to create makeup techniques for women's faces. Now, in those days, there were only two classes of women that used makeup: actresses and prostitutes. So George and his family, they happened to live in a building that was largely a bordello. So George began experimenting on the prostitute neighbors with his new makeup techniques. There might have been a little something else going on with those prostitutes too, but we're not going to get into that.
No, we're not going to go there. Well, it was around this time that twins Perce and Ern told their father that they wanted to learn the art of wig making. So George agreed to teach them, but he chained them to the workbench to ensure that they didn't get distracted.
Like physically chain them?
Yeah, chain them, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. George was never sure which one was which. Remember, they were twins. And so if he wanted one of them, he would just yell, "Percern!" See who came.
Well, once the twins learned the art of wig making, George decided to gain some publicity for his salon by convincing this local department store to sponsor a wig making competition. So the twins and another boy were locked in the department store front windows. They weren't allowed out except to go to the bathroom. Perc won the competition, creating an entire wig by hand in 23 and a half hours. Now, Ern came in second with a time of 26 hours.
Besides experimenting, in quotes, on the prostitutes, George also liked going to the movies. And in 1915, he got an idea while watching Douglas Fairbanks, Charlie Chaplin, and Mary Pickford, and many others on the big screen. He realized their wigs and makeup were really bad. In fact, he was quoted as saying their wigs were matte-like, only the word welcome was missing from them, which I think is such a funny quote.
That is so funny.
So inspired, he decided to move the family to California and bring his wig and makeup expertise to the film industry.
The Westmore family arrived in Los Angeles, and in March of 1917, George was quickly hired by Maison Césaire, the top salon in Los Angeles. Shortly thereafter, George came upon Selig Studios. This was a studio that produced the very first motion picture completed entirely in California, In the Sultan's Power, which came out in 1909. Now, George talked his way onto the lot, and he convinced the head of the production that even though the studio was mainly producing jungle pictures with animals, they still needed a makeup department. So 2 days later, George established the first ever makeup department in film history. He would arrive at the studio at 5 a.m. to do makeup and then head over to his job at Maison Césaire. Now, some of his tasks at Selig Studios included brushing out the mane of Jackie the Lion. Not exactly the type of star he had in mind.
No, I don't think so. Well, one day when he was working at Maison Césaire, actress Billie Burke walked in. She was doing a picture at Triangle Studios led by Thomas Ince, Max Sennett, and D.W. Griffith. And she needed a new wig, pronto. Burke's own hair was really quite thin. So George stayed up all night to ventilate a hair lace wig for her. Now, that's the technique that George had created. He would take 1 to 3 hairs at a time, pulling them through a lace base, then tying each hair in a knot. This process creates a natural hairline, giving the illusion that the hair is growing from the scalp, and the hair also moves in a very natural way, so it doesn't look like a wig.
That must have taken hours.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's a technique that is still in use today.
Wow. The next day when George delivered the wig to Billie Burke, she was thrilled. So George then offered to do her makeup, which, according to George, was all wrong. So after he finished, he clipped tiny pieces of hair off the back of the wig and he glued them one by one to Billie Burke's own eyelashes. So false eyelashes were born. Now, what was the result of the wig and the makeup? George was actually hired as the head of the second makeup department ever created. Triangle Studios offered him a position at $150 a week.
So that's 2 makeup departments, and he's the head of both.
And he's the head of both. And they're the first 2 in existence in the history of the studios.
Wow.
Yeah.
In 1918, son Bud Westmore was born in Los Angeles. George continued to work part-time at Selig and also stayed on at Maison Césaire, as well as at Triangle Studios. He made himself indispensable to Douglas Fairbanks, not only doing his makeup, but also cutting his hair with a new technique called layered cutting. It's a very common practice among stylists today, but back then, layered cutting allowed for the hair to stay in place. George also created the long twisted curls for Mary Pickford, which were later imitated by Shirley Temple.
By 1920, with his work at the studios increasing, George wasn't spending much time at Maison Césaire. But his young son, Perc, got a job at the salon as a janitor when he was just 15 years old. It was a position that would give him a big break. And the big break came one morning at 6 a.m. when he was sweeping out the shop floors when actor Adolphe Menjou stormed into the shop looking for George Westmore. Well, he was playing Louis XIII in The Three Musketeers, which came out in 1921 with Douglas Fairbanks. He accidentally shaved off half of his mustache, and he needed half a mustache. And fast. Well, George wasn't there, but Perc told him that he could make the mustache for him. So the actor replied, "Are you crazy? I have to have Westmore, not some kid." Well, Perc said, "I am a Westmore, and I'm as good as my father."
Well, Perc made Menjou half of a mustache on the spot, matching his hair color and painstakingly ventilating a small piece of muslin with a tiny hook knotting each hair separately, the technique he learned from his dad. Menjou returned to the set. Fairbanks examined the fake half mustache and couldn't tell the difference between the real and the fake. Well, that response from Perc at age 16 that he was as good as his father, very telling. There was a competitive rivalry between many of the brothers and with their father, and the father with the sons. Reportedly, Father George even pitted the twins against each other from a very early age.
Perhaps the oldest brother, Mont, had a sense of this unhealthy behavior because he struck his own path. In 1921, at the age of 19, he got a job in the commissary at famous Players Lasky, which later became Paramount Studios. Now, this was where he first saw Rudolph Valentino, who was filming The Sheik, 1921. Valentino was one of the biggest stars in the world, and Mont hoped that meeting Valentino would help launch his own career. When he heard they were hiring ditch diggers to build a stable for Valentino's horses, he jumped at the chance, hoping this might help him meet Valentino.
Mont's actions worked. He ingratiated himself to Valentino, who eventually asked Mont to become his valet or valet. Mont agreed and asked if he could do Valentino's makeup, and Mont created a whole new look for Valentino. He modified the heavy pencil on the brows, he reshaped them, thereby making Valentino's eyes look larger. He shadowed Valentino's jawline, he reduced the black eye makeup, he lightened his lip color to add fullness, and he washed that thick grease out of Valentino's hair and applied just a thin coat of Vaseline instead. These changes, if it's even possible, made Valentino more sexy than ever. And Valentino's makeup was done by Mont on all of his remaining films until Valentino's untimely death in 1926 at the age of 31.
After Valentino's death, Mont was immediately signed by Cecil B. DeMille to a $250 a week salary to work on The King of Kings, which came out in 1927. He was not only the makeup artist, keeping 3,000 extras looking good was no easy task, let me tell you, but Mont also had to keep Jesus sober. No. It seems that H.B. Warner, the actor who played Jesus, was feeling the pressure of playing Jesus. And who wouldn't, really?
Who wouldn't, yeah.
So Patriarch George Westmore also worked on the film as a specialist, devising Christ's beard. Now, 6 years after Mont stepped out on his own, their working together marked a reconciliation between Mont and his father, who was impressed with Mont's success.
Well, over the years, Mont worked independently for various studios, helping to create, number one, the flat-chested flapper look by strapping Clara Bow's breasts in the film It, 1927. Although that really wasn't his intent. He used gauze on Clara Bow's nipples and adhesive plaster across her breast instead of a bra because his real goal was to project the effect of nudity beneath a flimsy garment.
Mont also made house calls. Like, stars like Gloria Swanson who just didn't want to leave the house without makeup, they would call up Mont, he'd come over and make them up. He also worked with Paul Muni on Scarface, 1932, and created that fishhook hairpin for Sonia Henney so that all the normal hairpins that were flying around as she was skating would stop.
Mont also worked on Mutiny on the Bounty, 1935, with Charles Laughton, Clark Gable, and Francho Tone. Now, at this point, Mont was head of Selznick International Studio and supervised also all the makeup for Gone with the Wind in 1939. During that same time period, he was working on two other very difficult films, Intermezzo, 1939, and Rebecca, 1940. Gone with the Wind premiered on December 15th, 1939, and 4 months later, in April of 1940, Mont entered the hospital for a tonsillectomy, but died of a heart attack following the surgery. The doctor was quoted as saying, "Westmore had been in a weakened condition for some time as a result of his arduous work in charge of the makeup of the stars in Gone with the Wind." He was just 37 years old.
So Gone with the Wind killed Mont. Wow.
Yeah.
In 1923, 3 years after helping Adolphe Menjou with his mustache, Percival Harry Perc would head up his own makeup department at First National Pictures, which would eventually become Warner Brothers, where he would remain for 27 years, at one point overseeing 67 makeup artists and hairstylists. Now, Warner Brothers loaned Perc to RKO to engineer the deformed physique of Charles Laughton in The Hunchback of Notre Dame from 1939. Laughton and Perc did not get along very well, and there was this bizarre story of Perc getting Laughton down on all fours and spraying him with quinine water.
It's an image I can't get out of my head, actually.
And why?
I know, it was bizarre.
That's so strange.
Well, Perc is credited with changing Rita Hayworth's raven-haired locks to reddish blonde for the film The Strawberry Blonde, 1941, and for fashioning the little knot that often sat securely actually atop Katharine Hepburn's crown later in life.
Other assignments at Warner Brothers included makeup artists for Paul Muni as Emile Zola in The Life of Emile Zola, 1937. Also, the casts of Antony Adverse, 1936, and Jezebel, 1938, and Errol Flynn as Robin Hood in The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938. When Paul Muni won the Academy Award for The Story of Louis Pasteur, he thanked one man, Perc Westmore, saying that after he finished my makeup, quote, I looked in the mirror and I saw Louis Pasteur. Perc Westmore deserves as much credit as I for this award.
Wow.
Wow.
Nice.
Well, Perc had more clout in the industry than any other Westmore. He was sometimes called the fifth Warner brother. He did Marion Davies' makeup and became so friendly with William Randolph Hearst that Hearst gave Perc carte blanche space in his newspapers for any public relations he wanted. And Luella Parsons devoted a lot of column space to him, calling him the makeup genius. Perc also helped Carole Lombard enlarge her breasts. This was at her request.
Thank you.
For Lady by Choice 1934, all with the use of makeup.
Perc had also taken over Betty Davis's makeup in 1936 after Ern had created her mouth. We'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yes.
And he collaborated with her on more than 60 films. He was responsible for creating that look in The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex from 1939, shaving her hairline and eyebrows and trimming her famously long lashes, all of which would take 6 months to grow back. Betty Davis was actually quoted as saying, I owe my entire career to Perc Westmore. Now, Perc and Davis were extremely close, with Davis helping Perc throughout his divorces and his engagements.
He was a bit of a diva. In everything that I read about him, probably that's why he was the most well-known, because he kind of pushed himself out there. And he would apparently routinely resign from Warner Brothers. Well, the 81st time that he resigned, Jack Warner said, okay, sounds good. He accepted his resignation, and in 1949, he did continue in the industry with personal clients. Perc was married 5 times. He also struggled with alcohol, and he attempted suicide twice in 1958. Ultimately, his last marriage to Ola Carroll, who had been an assistant at the House of Westmore, a salon we'll talk about later, seemed to be a very happy one.
In the 1960s, when Universal opened its tour attraction, Perc Westmore was the front man for the Perc Westmore Makeup Show, which featured him giving lectures on film makeup to tourists. At the time, Brother Bud was head of the makeup department and feared that Perc was out to get his job. There was a lot of rivalry, a lot of competition there. Perc's final film was There Was a Crooked Man, 1970, with Kirk Douglas and Henry Fonda working with his brother Wally. Now, the two never really got along, but they finally reconciled on this film. Now, after working together for 4 months, Perc's heart gave out and he died of a massive heart attack in 1970. We have so many more Westmores to talk about, but before we do, I think it's time for a break, and it's also time for our pop quiz question of the day.
All right, the question is, the Westmores made Emmy history in 1999. What did they do to make that history?
Emmy history.
Emmy, as in the Emmy Awards.
That's interesting. I don't know.
All right, we'll be back with the answer and more after this.
All right, Steve and Ann are still back in makeup, getting touched up for the second part of the show. But first, another stop on the Hollywood tour. The Westmores didn't just cater to the Hollywood elite. They had advice for all women when it came to skincare and beauty tips. Among their suggestions, wash your face. Don't say, I cannot use soap on my complexion because I have sensitive skin. Remember, a good soap and water is the best cleansing agent for any skin. They also said never use green or blue eyeshadow. Makeup should look natural, and nobody was ever born with green or real blue shadow over their eyes. And gray hair does add to your age, but it's better to have a well-kept head of gray hair than a poor dye job which will fool nobody, not even yourself. And finally, be sure not to use too heavy a lipstick or you'll look like you're pouting, which is always out of style. And now back to Steve and Ann from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back, everybody. Before we get back into the lives of the Westmore family, that makeup dynasty, we want to give a shout out to Paula Weston, our listener of the week. Paula, thank you so much for not only listening, but for liking our social media and commenting and just supporting the podcast with all your good vibes. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Paula. So moving along, we've got so many more brothers to talk about, and we're going to move on to Ernest Henry, also nicknamed Ern. Now, he was described as the fragile genius in the family. Identical in his looks to his twin Perc, he couldn't have been more different personality-wise. However, he also struggled with alcoholism and attempted to commit suicide in 1970. 1937, something else the brothers had in common. And he did this after the breakup of his second marriage. By the way, he was married 4 times. Now, Ern was quoted as saying that he originally sought solace in alcohol because he was unable to bear the bitter competition that Father George fostered between him and Perc.
Well, even with his personal struggles, Ern made a number of impacts on the makeup industry. In The Sea Beast, 1926, he drew accolades for wrapping a slab of flank steak around John Barrymore's leg, covering it with makeup so that when a hot branding iron was pressed against the meat-shielded spot on Barrymore's leg, audiences literally gasped.
That is genius.
It is genius.
If you think about it.
Yeah, because it's going to sizzle.
It's going to sizzle and smoke, and
Yes.
that's so smart.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Barrymore was not a good influence on Ern, and by some accounts, even goaded him into his suicide attempt.
Oh, wow.
That's a crappy friend.
That's crappy. Ern served as head of the makeup department at RKO from 1929 to 1931. He created a full red-colored look for Betty Davis's mouth, changing how millions of women around the world wore their lipstick. Now, instead of the popular Cupid's bow lip, Ern had drawn Betty's mouth almost straight across and had extended the lengths of her lower lip and made it slightly heavier.
Well, and I can picture that, right?
Yeah.
She had that wonderful look. Ern also redevised the makeup for Claudette Colbert when brother Wally called him in a panic, not knowing what to do. Ern, unfortunately, was fired from RKO in 1931, most likely due to his tumultuous personal life and probably some drinking. Some say this was because Ern was guilt-ridden after what had happened to his father. More on that in just a second. But after a 4-year gap, Ern re-entered the business and became chief makeup executive at 20th Century Fox in 1935.
In the biography, The Westmores of Hollywood, Frank Westmore describes his father George as a dark, brooding genius, a man of monstrous appetites and ambitions whose uncontrollable drives spared no one in my family as he pushed relentlessly toward his all-consuming goal of making the name of Westmore famous throughout the world. But when George's sons began to surpass his position in Hollywood, and after the untimely death of his wife Ada, George began to decline.
Well, George, after Ada's death, married again hairdresser Anita Salazar in 1925. They had a daughter, Patricia, who was born in 1926. And side note, Patricia actually followed in the family business as well, becoming a hairstylist on television shows like the original Star Trek in 1967 through 69. Now, in 1926, so this is after DeMille's The King of Kings, when George had helped on that film, with his 4 oldest sons all flourishing at the major studios, George opened a new salon on Hollywood Boulevard, but nobody came.
Interesting.
Even the stars, including Douglas Fairbanks, to whom George had been closest, now preferred the sons to the father. When Paramount formed its makeup department, George assumed that Jesse Lasky would call him. Instead, he picked Wally, then only 20 years old, for the job. In 1928, George expected the call from RKO. Instead, it went to Ern. And in 1931, when the Motion Picture Academy awarded its cup, the forerunner to the Oscar, to Ern for his work on Cimarron, 1931, it seemed to be the final blow. Just a few weeks later, George committed suicide by swallowing mercury.
So tragic. Ern felt really guilty of his father's suicide and went on this massive drinking binge. He's quoted as saying, "The old man picked the most painful possible way to kill himself. It took 4 days for the bichloride of mercury to eat its way through his guts. I felt that even in the way he chose to die, he was punishing me for my success." Wow. That's intense.
That's really intense. Although their father had reportedly encouraged this rivalry between the twins earlier in 1930, Perc and Ern did partner with Max Factor, called the Percern. They created the first commercial toupee, which was branded with the Max Factor label. Perc and Ern were in charge of Max Factor's wig department, said to have been the biggest of its day. During this time, 95% of the cosmetics and 100% of the wigs used in the movie studio system were manufactured by Max Factor.
Perc and Ern also founded the Hollywood Art School of Makeup, whose purpose was to train others in the highly specialized art form. While at Max Factor Company, they created the Beauty Measurer, which is crazy.
The photos of this are like
I've
insane.
seen photos.
Yes.
It is insane.
Yeah.
It's this metal contraption that fits over the head of their actors, and it measures the symmetry of a woman's face, labeling the 7 face shapes and tips to enhance them. So these are some examples. Round was Olivia de Havilland.
Right.
Square was Joan Blondell.
I can see that.
Oval was Janet Gaynor. Oblong, Loretta Young. Triangle, Alice Faye. Inverted triangle, Geraldine Fitzgerald. And diamond, Anne Blythe.
Wow. Well, Perc did not want the Westmore genius wasted on someone else's brand, right?
Smart.
Namely, Max Factor. He wanted their line of products to go beyond the toupee to include cosmetics and a beautiful place to apply them with the Westmore name attached. So, even though the 6 brothers didn't really get along, in a rare collaborative effort, they created the House of Westmore.
Sounds so regal.
It does. It was housed in this beautiful building at 6638 Sunset Boulevard, and it was born on April 13th, 1935, becoming known as the epicenter of glamour, not only for Hollywood, but for the entire world. Kay Francis, Joan Blondell, and Claudette Colbert were part of the opening ceremony. So that's a pretty big opening, the House of
You mean
Westmore.
Joan Blondell with the square face?
Yes, right. Well, the salon took off immediately, and it became a tourist attraction, kind of along the lines of present day, Universal Studios or Disneyland. People would come into town and they'd want to go to the House of Westmore.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
I love that. So on any given day at the House of Westmore, you could find Rosalind Russell, Dolores Del Rio, Constance and Joan Bennett, or even Barbara Hutton as clientele. Laurence Olivier might be coming by to get a haircut, or Milton Berle getting his hair dyed. Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons would be seated at the salon with their notebooks writing down the latest gossip of all the clients. But there was also a back door to the House of Westmore where, for example, George Raft went on a Saturday morning to be fitted for what I would describe as an early Spanx for men, which it was constructed out of latex, and it kind of helped with their waistline a little bit.
The Westmores also produced a line of cosmetics that would eventually become available for purchase across the country in 50 of those high-end stores. The House of Westmore would last for over 30 years. But as stars started moving to places like Beverly Hills and Bel Air and Brentwood, that trek into Hollywood was less appealing, and other salons began springing up, taking business away from the once famous establishment.
Now, one of the Westmore brothers had 2 things that set him apart. 1, he was the only brother to marry just once.
Okay.
And 2, he was the only brother to die wealthy.
Wow.
Interesting. And of course, I'm talking about Walter James, or Wally Westmore. And initially, he wanted to be a stockbroker, but Perc convinced him to go into the family business. Well, Wally capitalized on Ern's reputation at Warner Brothers, learning everything he could from his brother Ern. Perc recommended him for a job at Paramount, where he became head of makeup at just 20 years old. Now, Wally's responsible for transforming Frederick March into Hyde in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 1931. He also invented a flesh-textured prosthetic hand for Harold Lloyd in the film Professor Beware, 1938, because Lloyd's finger and thumb had actually been blown off in a 1919 explosion when a prop blew up in his hand.
Wally was aloof, according to brother Frank, without many friends in the movie industry, although he was very fond of Bing Crosby. The 2 forged a relationship over Bing's ears, which stuck out. So another makeup artist kept trying to pin Bing's ears back with spirit gum, but his ears kept popping out when the hot studio lights melted the gum. So Wally was called in to help, and he convinced the studio head that Bing's ears had nothing to do with his voice. So Bing no longer had to have his ears pinned back. Now, Bing also hated wearing toupees, but here Wally insisted that Bing wear a toupee, saying, flapping ears are one thing, but a skin-headed, flapping-eared romantic crooner is ridiculous. And so Bing actually credits Wally and Wally's persistence in convincing him to wear toupees for the extraordinary longevity of his movie career, which makes sense because he's made to look younger.
Total sense, yeah. According to the youngest brother, Frank, Wally was not in touch with the realities of the business, particularly this new upstart technology called television. Now, this lack of understanding would eventually lead to him being terminated from Paramount in the late 1960s. Wally suffered a number of strokes in his later years, and he died on July the 3rd, 1973.
Well, others in the family include Dorothy Westmore, who also trained as a makeup artist and was involved in the very early planning of the House of Westmore. She married actor Arthur Stone in 1927, but tragically just 2 months after Father George died, Dorothy passed away after minor surgery, and she became known as the Sister who would have been one of them.
Aw.
Yeah.
Now, the fifth brother was Hamilton Adolph, nicknamed Bud, because you got to have a nickname in the Westmore family. And he amassed over 600 credits as makeup artist or supervisor. He was the head of makeup at 20th Century Fox and became known as the Irving Thalberg of makeup artists because, like Thalberg, his good looks made him a romantic target for nearly every aspiring actress in town. He was married to actresses Martha Ray and Rosemary Lane. Now, Martha fell in love with Bud when he was assigned to do her makeup for the movie Rhythm on the Range, 1936. Martha had a very influential stage mother. But Martha married Bud without Mom's approval, so afterward, Martha's mother insisted that Martha sleep with a gun under her pillow and an apple pie in the bed between them, lest Bud try to get at her during the night.
Oh my gosh. Or you get hungry.
Right?
Yeah.
Needless to say, the marriage only lasted 3 months. The divorce was tabloid fodder when Martha was quoted as saying she had to make the choice, and this is a quote, between my mother, who made me what I am today, and Bud, who can make me up better than anyone else.
Oh my gosh.
Tough call.
Yeah. Bud was also the executive in charge of the makeup department at Universal Pictures for almost 24 years. He worked to create the mermaid makeup for Anne Blythe in Mr. Peabody and the Mermaid, 1948.
Which that mermaid suit is amazing.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
The photographs of it are...
Each little scale, it's so specific.
And this book talks about all the process that he went into. It's amazing. And he created the creature in Creature from the Black Lagoon, 1954. With creature makeup that was so frightening that star Richard Carlson was quoted as saying, "The suit was so frightening and so real that I'd forget we were play acting." The New York Times actually called the monster suit the real star of the film. I'm sure Richard Carlson did not appreciate that.
Exactly. Well, you know, Bud managed to stay at Universal throughout the 1960s, but like many of his brothers, he was extremely protective of his position, and he didn't really make a pathway for anyone below him to advance up further. He was fired just a few months short of his 24th year at Universal, and he was a recluse for 2 years. He returned to work briefly on films such as Soylent Green, 1973, with Charlton Heston and Edward G. Robinson, but the hereditary heart issues cut his life short. He died of a heart attack in 1973 at the age of 55. Just 2 days later, brother Wally died at the age of 67, succumbing to the physical effects of repeated strokes.
The baby of the family, Frank, was born in 1923. He was just 14 years old when he began learning the makeup business from Ern on Elephant Boy, 1937, with Sabu. He also worked at the House of Westmore as a teenager, cleaning wigs after school and every Saturday. He was one of the makeup artists for The Ten Commandments, 1956. It's so funny, he described his work as body spraying and slapping beards on some 4,000 men. And because of his relationship to that film, Frank referred to Cecil B. DeMille as his surrogate father, which I think is very sweet.
Now, Frank's other films included The Mountain, 1956, where he withstood not only the location shooting conditions, but the wrath of Spencer Tracy. I'm sure there's a story there.
Yeah.
Now, he was a makeup artist on a number of Shirley MacLaine films, including My Geisha, 1962, creating MacLaine's Asian eyelids, Two for the Seesaw, 1962, Irma la Douce, 1963, Sweet Charity, 1969, Two Mules for Sister Sarah, 1970, and Being There, 1979.
Wow.
Now, he and MacLaine became very close friends, and he also worked on The Towering Inferno, 1974. Frank made the transition soon into television, working on Heart to Heart and the Kung Fu television movie, for which he won the Emmy in 1972.
I wonder if on Heart to Heart he talked with Robert Wagner about The Mountain and Spencer Tracy.
Oh, I know, because he would know. That's right. In 1976, Frank wrote the book about his family entitled The Westmores of Hollywood, which was co-written by Muriel Davidson, which Nan, would you recommend
Oh my gosh,
that book?
it's such a good book. There's so many stories that we just couldn't tell. We just didn't have the time.
You did a deep dive into that book,
Yeah,
I know.
it's a great book.
Frank ended up dying in 1985 at the age of 62 of, yet again, a heart ailment.
Yes. Well, the Westmore legacy did not end with Frank. Michael Westmore, who was Mont's son, won an Academy Award for Mask in 1985. You might remember.
Great makeup.
Yes, fantastic
Great.
makeup. There was no category for makeup artists to be honored with an Oscar until 1981. I just wonder how many of those first generation Westmores would have won had there been a category.
Right? Yeah.
Michael is an expert in the field of special makeup, designing for over 100 films and TV credits, including all the Rocky movies and Raging Bull 1980. And he also has a book about makeup, which is fascinating.
Oh, wow. And what a resume.
Yeah.
My gosh. Also continuing the legacy are Marvin and his children, Candace and Kevin, Mont Jr., Ern's daughter Lynn, and Wally's granddaughter, Pamela. The Westmore family received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2008.
Well, all these generations of Westmores have become synonymous with Hollywood beauty. But I think what we've learned today is that it's not just a story about glamour and innovation. There's also some rivalries, some addiction, some loss, and just a reminder that even those families that shape this world of Hollywood that we live in, they are still human behind the curtain. The Westmores didn't just create faces for the movies, they kind of lived the cost of the dream as well.
Well said, well said. Now I think it's time to reveal our pop quiz question of the week's answer.
Okay, this is the question. The Westmores made Emmy history in 1999. What did they do?
I have no idea.
Well, in 1999, 5 different Westmores were nominated for the Emmy Award for their work in television makeup.
Really?
Yes, so Candace Westmore and Marvin Westmore were nominated for the HBO film The Rat Pack. Do you remember that?
I
Starring
remember
Ray
that.
Liotta,
I sure do.
Joe Mantegna, and Don Cheadle. Michael Westmore and June Hangmore Westmore for the series Star Trek DS9.
Wow.
And Kevin Westmore for the series X-Files.
Oh my gosh. Did any of them win?
Yes, Kevin Westmore and the team from the X-Files won the Emmy that year.
Well, I would hope with 5 contenders, somebody in the family would win that Emmy.
Yes. But how fun would that be, that party to go
I know.
to? Well,
What a family.
what a family. I need to put some lipstick on. I don't know about you, but
I'm going to go to my makeup graveyard and
okay,
pull out something.
Well, thanks everybody for spending this time with us. We would love it if you would give us a 5-star review wherever you listen to the podcast. And if you watch us on YouTube, we wish you would give us a thumbs up and subscribe. Also, follow us on social media. Our handle is @FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram.
And we loved hearing from you, so please keep those emails coming. You can email us at info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
That's this week's View.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Ann McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review, and tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor Lindsay Schnebley. Associate producer and researcher John Price Ritchie. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2026, all rights reserved. That's a wrap.